Hey, wait a minute, that's not my logo. That's because in this tutorial I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to start with a simple image and turn it into a beautiful 3D logo animation of your own. This tutorial is loaded with tips and tricks. Stay tuned. Yes, there it is. Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Derek from Dirk.com, and we are going to be making the logo animation you saw in the intro. I haven't seen it yet because I haven't made it yet. I use the tutorial file as the file that I render for the animation so that you guys know you're going to see exactly how to make what you saw. So if someone from the future can tell me how this tutorial turns out, please let me know. Anyways, let's get started. So I have my basic scene set up here with an area lamp, a seamless backdrop, and a camera. I want to hold on to those, but I'm going to move them by pressing M and move them to layer, that one, whatever layer that is. So the logo we're going to be making is this one here, designed by Alex Brunsen. He's a graphic designer, and he wanted to use Blender to kind of enhance some of the ways he presents his logos to clients. And he's from North Carolina, which is where I'm from too, so that's extra cool. Alex reached out to me via Instagram and kind of started asking me these questions, and it's kind of where we came up with the idea for this tutorial. So I encourage you to also go follow me on Instagram. There's my handle right there. Go ahead, pause the video, go follow me. It's awesome. And so anyways, reach out to me on Instagram. Handle's still right there. Go follow me. And you can send me your own requests and talk to me about Blender stuff, because I'm a nerd and I like to talk about Blender stuff all the time. So anyways, we have this beautiful logo here by Alex Brunsen again, and we want to use this as a backdrop pretty much to kind of start modeling. So I'm going to go to my top view, and what did I say? Background image? Yes, there's a button for background image. We're going to use this one right here. Check that, nothing happens. And by the way, if you don't see that sidebar, you can press N and it'll pull it up. So I already have the image loaded in, so I'm going to hit add image, use this little drop down right here, and select the logo, and it's good to go. You don't need to use a transparent PNG, but that's what I'm using just because that's what I got, and it looks a little cleaner. You don't have extra stuff around the outside. So this is good to go. I'm going to go into my front view. You can see the background image is there too. I don't really want that since I'm only going to be modeling this in the top view. So I'm going to change this from all views to top. And now it will only be in my top view. That's looking good. If you were modeling something like a car and you had multiple reference images for the front, side, top, etc., you would set up multiple background image using this, this control to tell where they go. We don't need to worry about that though, because we're just going to be modeling this in the top view. So I'm going to add a plane right there. And I'm going to use that to start kind of shaping this logo out. So first thing I'm going to do is go into full screen on this. So I'm going to press Shift Spacebar, and you can do that in any window. It's quite convenient for full screening things. And so now that we're looking nice and big here, plenty of space to model, I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode. Grab this with G, move it up here. And the reason I went into edit mode before I moved it was so that my pivot point stayed right where it was. If I did not do that, then the pivot point would have moved. But I want my origin to stay right here in the middle of the object, because that's kind of the middle of the logo. So I'm going to press Z so I can see what I'm doing. Tab back into edit mode there. Right click to select that vertice and just G to grab it. Kind of move it down, move it where it goes. Repeat that process. Right click to select those. E to extrude them. G to move that. And now, since this is straight here, I could just select them both, press E, and place it at what looks like straight. But I'm going to right click to cancel this movement. The vertices are still there because I pressed E, and I'm going to just use my manipulator to drag that over. Right about there. If you hold down Shift while you're dragging, it will kind of like fine drag, if you could say that, if that makes sense. Good for perfectionists such as myself to get things exactly right. So that's looking pretty good. Haven't actually checked this yet, but I'm guessing if I press Shift D, rotate this, I'm holding Control, look down at the dot in the bottom left. Shift will slow rotate, just like it did with the movement. Control will do increments, and that's the case in pretty much any command, any slider, anywhere in Blender. So I'm holding Control to rotate that 180 degrees, G to grab it, and voila, it's perfectly matched, I think. Good work, Alex. Nice symmetrical logo there. So that's looking good. Shift spacebar to go back into my main view here. And let's bring back our layer this, whatever we called it. And this is looking a little bit big. I want to scale this down a little bit. So I could just press S to scale it, but it's going to change the actual scale of the object here, which means that if I went to apply a solidify modifier and made it, 1 unit solid, then if it was at 0.3, it would actually be 0.3 units solid. So you want the scale to stay at 1. So I'm going to Control Z, and there's two ways I could do this. I could press Scale, press Control A to apply the scale, or like we did earlier with the origin, we could go into Edit mode, press A to select everything, and then just scale it in Edit mode, and you'll get the same result. You can see our scale is at 1. So there's another kind of funky thing happening here, and that is this weird pattern. What that is called zero geometry, and that means that basically this ground plane I have and the logo are occupying the exact same plane here. So that wouldn't happen in real life, I don't think. Some crazy scientist let me know if I'm wrong. I'm going to drag this up a little bit, and that problem is eliminated. So now we've got our 3D scene here, but the logo is looking very, very flat. So we are going to make it solid, and we're going to use a solidify modifier. What does it do? It solidifies. Very intelligently named commands here in the Blender software. So let's drag this up. This is thickness. You can see I drag it and then it stops. Why does it stop? Well, it's not actually stopping. If I go into my wireframe here, it's going through that bottom plane. So I don't want it to go down. I want it to go up. So I could make this a negative value, or I could, let's go ahead and set it to whatever we want here. Let's do 6 inches or so. Yes, I am an American. Sorry. No metric yet. One day, I'm sure. Maybe. So I got my thickness. I can switch this now. Instead of doing -6, I'm just going to change this offset from -1 to +1. And you can see what that does. It just changes where it is. So looking good. Now, the next thing that I want to do, and again, you don't have to do it, is make these edges not so sharp. So we're going to, this is going to look somewhat realistic. We're going to use, some decent lighting and whatnot. So one thing that makes this not realistic is this extremely sharp edge, which would pretty much never occur in real life again, but in 3D is the default. So the way we avoid that is by adding a bevel modifier. And the bevel modifier will do that. Way too big there. Let's bring this value down. So you can see this is what the bevel modifier is doing. It's just giving us, it's kind of cutting that edge a little bit. So again, this is a style choice. I want this logo still to maintain its shape for the most part. I just want this edge to be kind of eased. So I'm just going to set this at something, something that looks good, or something perfect, because I'm a perfectionist. Let's actually make that 100. That's looking good. So you may have already messed with this, but the segments button changes the amount of segments that it takes to make that bevel, which will make it more smooth, more detailed. You do have to be careful, however, though. You don't want to do too much. You can see up here in the top, I have 276 vertices in this scene. If I change this to 3 segments, my vertices goes to 468. 4, 5, 6, it goes even higher. And now you can see we have an absurd amount of vertices in this scene for what should be very simple. So you need to be very careful with how you add detail in any 3D scene in general. So we're only going to be viewing the logo from out here or so, and I can bring this all the way back down to 2, and you can hardly even notice that it changed. So be smart about how you use this, especially if you're going to be rendering an animation. Every vertice counts. More vertices, the longer it's going to take to render. What we need to do next is set this to smooth. So I've got my bevel there. Let's go ahead and set that to smooth, just so that the bevel doesn't have those kind of sharp angles. And if we didn't have the bevel modifier on, this smooth would look kind of funky, but the bevel is actually helping tell Blender where those edges are. There's another little bit of an issue going on here. You can see this kind of like sharp edge, and with it set to flat, that doesn't happen, but with smooth, it's taking into account all these vertices, and you can see when I go into wireframe view, if I crank this segments up, you can see it's applying a bevel to this, what should be flat surface here. So I don't want that. The way I can easily avoid that is to add a limit method to the bevel modifier. So I'm going to change this to angle, and you can see the problem is already fixed. I don't want to go into too much detail there, but basically that limits the bevel modifier only to angles that are greater than what you have this set to. So from this plane to this plane should be 0 degrees, which is under 30, so it's flat. And I'm going to leave it at that. That rhymed. That was beautiful. Okay, anyways. So we've got our beveled, solidified object. And you could have extruded this. You could have made this 3D by going E, Z, extrude it like that. But now, if I needed to make any change, I only have to change one vertex, and instead of changing multiples. So anyways, that's kind of an advantage of the solidify modifier. It's not so destructive. So we've got our logo set up here, looking pretty good. I need to do a couple more things to get this logo animation going. Well, a lot of things. So let's get into those. One is going to be to set up materials, and the next is going to be to set up the camera. I'm actually going to set, what should we do first? Let's do the camera first. Okay, and you could do it really any order you want. I'm just over here in rendered view checking things out because I like to do that a lot. I want to make sure things are looking decent and to encourage myself to keep going, because sometimes when it looks like crap, it's really hard to keep going. And rendered view makes everything look beautiful. I have an HDRI setup, which has given me, this lighting. I have a tutorial on that. I'll put a link in the description if you want to see that. So, looking good. Let's get out of there. Stop admiring this plain logo. It's not plain, but it's plain right now because I haven't done anything to it. Press Control Numpad 0 to go into my camera view. I want to set my camera up. So I'm going to press Shift F in camera view, and that's going to enter, I believe it's called fly mode. Maybe F is for fly. And I want to find a good spot. If it's moving too fast for you, like this, you can scroll down on your mouse wheel and it'll slow it down. And by the way I'm flying around here is with my W, A, S, and D keys. If you've played any computer or video game, you're probably quite familiar with how that works. So I'm going to scroll down to kind of slow this down, and scrolling up speeds it up. Let's get our camera to somewhere where we want it. And you kind of have to plan this out. You want to know what you're doing before you do it, which I am not doing here. So I think what I want to do is have the camera kind of start here, move over there, and then I want a separate shot where it kind of goes up. You guys have already seen the intro. I haven't, because I'm making it right now. So you already know what happens, spoiler alert, but I don't. So let's get this first part set up here. I think that looks good. I kind of want to, just have a abstract kind of reveal at first. Something like that looks good. And now you also need to be sure you've decided how long you want your animation to be and stuff like that. I'm going to make mine 5 seconds long, which is a good time for logo animation. You don't want to go crazy long because people will leave your video if 30 seconds in they're still watching your logo animation. So be smart about it. And it would take longer to render anyways. So 5 seconds, 24 frames per second, which isn't the best, but it's, kind of a standard. I'm going to do 24 frames per second for 5 seconds, which means 120 frames total is how many frames this animation is going to take. So I want the first part of my animation to be about half of it. Well, let's do less. Let's say the first little camera shot is 2 seconds. So 2 times 24 is 48. That's about how long it's going to be. And then the second section would be the remaining 72 frames. Is that right? Yes, 72. This is not a math tutorial. So let's get our camera. Let's start keyframing this bad boy. So I'm going to select my camera here. And you can see when I'm flying around, if you look right here, the location and the rotation are all changing. So that's what we're going to want to add keyframes for. So let's get this set up where we like it. Right there, I think was about right. And you could right click and insert keyframes, or let's undo that. You could go down here to your keying set and change it to location rotation. And that means when you press this button, it will insert keyframes for all those variables, which in this case is all the location and all the rotation. So now what I want to do is move to frame 48, which is kind of where that section of the animation will end, and press Shift F again to move it, and then ever so slightly just kind of come over here. That's looking good. And now if we click and drag, oh, we lost what happened. We forgot to put in our keyframe while we were on frame 48. So it just snapped back to where the first keyframe was, because this animation basically is saying, stay here. And by the way, when you're on the keyframe, you will see these lit up yellow, and when you're off, it's green. And that means that there are keyframes in the animation for that value that's green, but they're somewhere else. So when you get to there, you can see that's where those keyframes are. So let's go back to our frame 48 here. I'm going to press Shift F, move a little bit, and insert another keyframe. And now we can see it worked. And for the purposes of previewing this, I'm going to change this end just down to 48. And I'm going to press play. So let's look at that full screen. Again, Shift Spacebar. And that's looking kind of cool. It's doing this weird thing though where it's slow and then it speeds up and then it's slow. I don't really want that. And what that is a thing called easing. And a lot of animation software does that. So basically, when you are working with keyframe animation, you tell, like I'm telling Blender, I want the camera to be here at this frame and then here at this frame. So there's a little man inside your computer that figures everything else out. Just kidding. It's not a little man. It's keyframe interpolation. And if we go over here into our graph editor, this is going to be scary. Put on your sunglasses, shield your eyes. Graph editor. And the reason I can't find it is because I was just pressing G, which you see G is underlined here. That means that's the hotkey. E, G, E, G. Anyways, I love hotkeys. So this is the graph editor, and this is an example of the easing. So it applies this curve. It interpolates what happens between those two keyframes with a Bezier interpolation. So I want this just to go straight from here to here. None of that slowing down or speeding up. So over here in my graph editor, I'm going to press A to select everything just like you would in object mode. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I'm pressing T, and I'm going to change the keyframe interpolation to linear. And now you can see this line is now straight. All these other lines are straight too, but this one's just, you can see it better. So now when we watch this, you can see it moves straight from one to another. And that's all a matter of preference, but it's a little more cinematic. It's kind of more what I'm going for here. So that's looking good. Let's go and save our file, by the way. Good idea to do that often. And now what I want to do is set up the second. Let's get rid of this graph editor because I know it's going to scare people if I leave it up for too long. It is terrifying, something I didn't mess with for a long time. So I'll probably do a whole tutorial on the graph editor sometime soon so we can really go into depth. But Not going to talk about it anymore in this tutorial. So we have our first camera set up here. That looks good. Let's bump that back up to 120 for the end of our animation. And I want to add another camera. So I'm going to press Shift D, duplicate that. And if I move this, it's going to snap back to where it was. That's because when I duplicated this camera, it picked up all the same info. So for this camera, I want it to have its own animation. So I'm going to press this little button right here, and that's going to remove all the keyframes. You have to be on the keyframe now. A faster way to do that is to, in this case, go right up here, right click, and click Clear Keyframes. And that will just wipe everything out. Clear Keyframes. Again, everything's gone. And it should have kept them for this one. So yes, that camera is still moving. Let's leave this in camera view down here. That camera's still moving, and this one is still. So now we need to get this camera about where we want it. So I'm going to press Control Numpad 0 again, Shift F, and let's get this kind of where we want it here. I do want this to be looking straight down though, so I want to make all these 0. So I'm going to click, drag down, release, and type 0. That's the way you can select all of these in a field. I'm going to do that again here on the location. Press 0. Oops. Now we're 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 at the origin. So I don't want that obviously. So let's drag this up along the z-axis. And now, so this part starts at frame 48. So I want to insert a keyframe where I want that to start. And I think I want it to start just barely off screen right there. You can see I'm looking down here in my camera view. And I could do the same thing where I inserted all these keyframes, but I'm really only working with this Z location. So I'm just going to insert single keyframe. And I did that just by right clicking, insert single keyframe. And you can see the text changes to replace once there's a keyframe already in there. So got that there. And now we need to have this end at frame 120 just by moving up a little bit. I'm going to insert another keyframe. And now you can see it moves up. But it is doing that thing again. Let's drag this up. Where it kind of slows down and speeds up. But I want it to be constant, so let's go back into Graph Editor. Press A to select everything and change this to linear. Now you can see it goes at a constant rate. So let's put our start back to 1. Now the tricky part. Well, it's not that tricky because I'm going to show you how to do it, but it's tricky because I didn't know how to do it for a long time. I don't know why, I just never did. And what that is telling Blender when to switch cameras. So right now you can see this is the active camera we got there by Control Numpad 0. We can make that one act the same way. But it's not, we want it to switch from one camera to the next, like you saw in the intro, which again, I will say, I have not seen yet. We're doing it right now. So to make this switch happen, we need to use a thing called markers. So there's a little menu down here called marker. And you can add a marker by pressing M. Here I am preaching hotkeys, but I didn't know what the hotkey was because I don't use this that often. But it is right there for you to see M. A would probably also do the same thing because it's underlined. Anyways, so we've got a marker there. And we're going to add another marker where we want the camera to switch, which is right there at frame 48, 2 seconds in. Again, because 24 times 2 is 48. And we're going to add another marker at frame 48. Let's actually, I want to use the hotkey just so I can start getting used to it. M. Up. Oh wait. M. No? M. Okay. A lot of times hotkeys work based on where your cursor is, so I needed my cursor to be in this view here. Okay. Now, next thing is to bind the camera to these markers. So you can see the first camera is still the one selected, but to bind it to a marker, I'm going to right click that marker, and you have to do this. You have to right click it, and then I'm going to have the camera selected as well. view bind camera to markers. And that's going to bind this camera to that marker. So now we want to select this marker and this camera, just that camera and the marker, and then view bind camera to marker. And that should work. Yes, it does. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to press play here and then go into my full screen. Nice. Looking good. All right. I like it. I think I'm good with that. So let's start setting up some materials here. So I'm going to go back into my rendered view here. And this is where it really comes down to preference. You know, obviously if you're working with some particular brand, you probably want to use their colors and stuff like that. But I think Alex, again, the designer of this logo, has kind of a red and black theme. So I like the white, but I think I want to make it black. So click in here and go to my node editor. And I want to add a material. So I'm going to go over here and press new. That will add a material. It added a white material, so it didn't look very different. And I'm going to press Shift S to switch this to a principled shader. You can't do Shift S to switch unless you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which you can do in the user preferences. But it's not right where I clicked. There it is right there. So yes, if you didn't have that enabled, you would press Shift A, add shader, principled. So anyways, principled shader is the new shader in Blender. It works really well. It does a lot of stuff for you. I like it. Use it. So let's make this like dark. Maybe not all the way back, but pretty darn gray. And that's looking pretty cool. It's a little too dark though. You can't really see what's going on. So let's I want to add like an underglow. I mentioned the colors being kind of like a red and black. So I'm going to add an underglow. It sounds really complicated. It's going to be really simple. So what I want to do is press Shift D to duplicate the logo. And I'm just going to move that up a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. That's kind of cool. I want to just make this like a flat plane that emits light that's right underneath it. So to get it to be a flat plane, I need to get rid of my solidify modifier, which also means my bevel modifier is no longer needed. And I'm going to change this to a new material. Let's name this first material logo. Now over here in my materials tab, I'm going to hit this plus sign, which will create a duplicate of the material. And now I'm going to name that emit, because it's going to emit light. So now I'm going to switch this principled to a emission shader. And it's not working because the color is black. Let's change that to white, crank it up a little bit, and let's make it red. So I want to pick a nice bright red there. That's looking pretty good. And I'm going to move this back down. All right, now it is underneath, and you might want to move it kind of down a little bit more. Whatever you like. That looks pretty good. Now my area lamp up here is really kind of messing me up. It's taken away from the dark mysteriousness, so I'm going to delete that. Oh yeah, now we're talking. That's looking good. I don't even want this HDRI. I'm going to bail on that. Let's just turn the strength down to 0. Maybe not. Let's leave that just so we've got a little bit of light coming in here. So let's just take a look at this. Obviously, if you're in render view over here, it's going to be kind of slow. You can't necessarily watch the animation in real time, but just kind of seeing how that looks. Looks pretty good. Let's maybe make this kind of like shiny. Yeah, let's bump down this roughness a little bit. Maybe to 0.1. Yeah, now we've got this good shine going on. You would need an HDRI to get that nice shininess. So let's see how that actually looks with the camera angle we had set up. I think I like that. Yeah. Maybe not so shiny. Let's bring this up a little bit. I don't want to mess with this too long, but you guys should take all the time you need to get this just right, because we are going to be rendering an animation and it's a lot of frames to render. So I'm happy with this. I think it looks good. I think I'm done. So I'm not done yet though. What I need to do is render this now. Make sure you have all your settings set up exactly how you want them. Do some test renders, stuff like that, so that you know everything looks right. You don't want to mess up a setting when you're doing animation, because, you know, like as you're watching this, it's probably going to take like a minute to render this frame. So we're not just rendering one frame here, we're rendering 120. So you need to be sure that everything is set up really nicely so that you don't have to re-render it. It would be a tragedy to have to re-render an animation because you had the wrong setting or something like that. So pick an appropriate number of samples, do the right resolution, get whatever you need. I'm going to crank this up a little bit because I'm actually going to be rendering this on a service called Renderstreet, which is something I've subscribed to. I'll put a link in the description. So I'm not actually going to render this on my computer. I'm going to render it on their computers, which is something I pay for. But you can do a free trial with them, and that'll you could render this animation on it. So anyways, I'm going to render this out, and in the next part of the video, I'm going to show you guys how to put all these frames we rendered together to make an actual movie. So if you're liking the tutorial so far, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys in the next part. All right, and we're back. I have rendered out all the 120 frames that comprise this 5-second logo animation. I actually didn't render them on my computer. I rendered them on Renderstreet, which is a Blender render farm service that I pay for. This is not a paid advertisement, but I was working on a freelance project. I needed to render a lot of stuff, and the Blender community seemed to really like Renderstreet. So didn't do a ton of research, but I went ahead and subscribed to their plan, and I love it. It works really well. So if you guys are interested in checking that out, I'm leaving a link in the description. I think that link does give me some points. If you click on it, it gives me like some render credits or something. So anyways, not a paid promotion at all, but really great people, great support. So definitely check that out. So anyways, I've got all the frames rendered, and what we're going to do now is pull them all together into a usable video format. So the other thing you'll notice is that my interface looks a little bit different. What I did was reload the default Blender startup file, just because this next part can be a little confusing. I know I've set my things up a little bit differently, so I want to make sure that we're working from the way that you guys are going to be seeing it if you're using the default settings in Blender. So let's jump right into that. What we're going to do is go up here and change the screen layout from default to video editing. And this is what it looks like. Like I mentioned, I changed mine a little bit, but the only thing I really changed is this graph editor. For some reason, the graph editor pops up right here. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but I don't particularly know why that's there. So I'm going to change this into the properties panel so that we can see all those options we need to render this video out. So the next thing we're going to do is, you can see Renderstreet has a nice little plugin there. What we're going to do is add in our frames. So I'm going to, down here, this is the video sequence editor. Some of you guys probably didn't even know Blender had that. So I'm going to click add, and then I'm going to select image, and I've already navigated to the folder here. You can click and drag to select them all, or you can press A twice, just like if you were in object mode or something like that. A lot of the commands in Blender work in many areas, even in the file browser. So I've got those all selected. I'm going to select add image strip, and now you can see our animations in there. You will notice it's a little longer than it needs to be. That's because, like I mentioned, I went back to the default settings, so it's at 250 now. Drop that back down to 120. And our frame rate is still 24 frames per second, which is great. I think that's about it. Oh, the other thing, 1920 by 1080 is what I render this at, and that is also the default, so that is already set up there. But I want to do this as a full-size render, so I'm going to crank that up to 100%. If you render it at 50%, it'll just render at half that size, as you can imagine, and that's, for previewing things. So that looks pretty good. The next thing I want to do is select my output location. So once we hit render, we'll want to change this location to somewhere where the video file you'll want to end up. And you can see I have this laid out right there. You would have done the same thing when you were rendering these frames initially. You would have had to pick a place where you want them to go. So that's set up. Now what I want to do is change the output from a PNG image into a video file. And I'm not going to go into details about all these different ones, partly because I really don't know what each one of them is necessarily for. But one that I know works is this AVI raw, and that's going to produce a pretty high file size, but I know it's got most of the detail in there, and it's going to work fine for what we want. So I've got my video file selected. Again, you might have to look into some of these other ones depending on what you're doing, but AVI raw I know works well. So that's all set up. We got our output folder, double check some things, 24 frames per second, 120 frames, and I think we're good to go. So all we need to do now is click render animation, and it'll start cranking away at that. And it won't take very long because it's all it's doing is compiling those images together. It's not actually rendering anything. So that's about it for this tutorial, guys. As soon as that finishes, which it just did, it'll pop up in the folder you selected, and you'll have a usable video file that you can pull into After Effects, or you can even continue editing in Blender. So I hope you guys really enjoyed the tutorial. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos like these. If you have suggestions for tutorials you'd like to see, please leave a comment in the comments section. Or like I mentioned earlier, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or any of the other platforms where you can find me. And I'd be happy to hear what you thought about this tutorial and about any ideas you have for other tutorials. So thank you again so much for watching. Please give me that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.